Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Julie, for giving me the opportunity to talk about my PhD and the work that I feel like I've been doing forever. And this particular presentation we presented at Canada at the Guelph University. So my research topic, as you can read on the first page, is investigating WHS, workplace health and safety, as a framework to reduce horse-related human injuries and fatalities in both a work and non-work environment. So just a little bit of a quick background of who I am. My whole working life has been around workplace health and safety. As a industry expert, I suppose, in the areas I work a lot in: mining, construction. I do work with aviation, the government, councils, disability services, pretty much every workplace. There's no particular one that I'm siloed to, because WHS is fairly generic. So that's where my working life has been for over 20 years. Prior to that, I was working in intensive and coronary care. So I have a strong health-related background, and then rehab to try and rehabilitate injured workers. Also, from an equestrian perspective, I've been breeding horses for over 38 years, performance horses. Today, I have been out serving mares and rebreeding. We have a stud farm here in Narrabri. We've had 13 foals born this year in a drought, and we're feeding about 40 horses. So for 50 years, I've pretty much been riding and competing in areas like the Australian Stock Horse Society. I have done dressage, 3-day eventing, etc. So I come to you with a bit of a mix of industry, workplace health and safety, and also, I suppose, equine and horse related. So that's who I am. So if we kick on here, one of the real determinants for me to start looking at how we can do things better is the death of the young girl Sara War in 2009, who I think has driven a fairly strong industry transition to how we can do things better in safety and welfare with horses and humans. There was a kaleidoscope of events with her death at TAFE in Dubbo. One of the things, she was an inexperienced rider. She was on a racehorse. There had been reported near misses about the unsuitability of this particular horse for her. And there were people there that hadn't had specific training to supervise and coach students. So it kind of kick-started where I wanted to see the equestrian industry years later because of this young girl's death. And I suppose my take-home message tonight is I believe we can do better than what we are. On the right-hand side, you'll see a picture here of my beautiful stallion. I lost him only this year, in June. So, yeah, horses are a big part of my life and have been for a very long time. And I suppose also when you think about the work that I'm doing with this PhD, you've always got to have someone around to help you so that you can continue on a journey. And that's my man there, Ian, with one of our big girls. She's a Shire. So, yeah, we have a few different horses, but mainly we breed stock horse, quarter horse cross. So the importance of this research, that's what I'm going to talk about, why I'm doing this research. Also the design of a survey that we distributed and how we distributed it. Some key qualitative findings. I'm going to mention some of those and what qualitative is. Basically, it's basically what you can't measure, and it's what you can't observe or control. Whereas your quantitative findings, you basically remove any human bias and you look at individual units of behaviour and you look at statistical significance, validity, reliability, repeatability. My paper that will hopefully be completed this year is focused on the quantitative findings. But I am going to talk about a couple of qualitative because people's opinions are pretty eye-opening, to say the least. And then I'm going to talk about, just briefly, what I think needs to change. So the importance of this research to me is that we are still having significant injuries and illnesses associated with humans and horses, and also fatalities. You know, there's been a lot of stats thrown around. You know, we know in Australia we kill more than 20 people a year. There's 1 person a day admitted to hospital. And a significant amount of those people are young females from the age of 14 to 25 years. And as we know, a lot of injuries are serious. And let me tell you, when I was nursing in intensive and coronary care, I did see a number of pretty serious injuries. We're talking head trauma, we're talking upper body, crush, etc. And we seem to be monitoring these stats, and I believe we need to look at how we're going to change that. Not only the number of deaths and injuries, it's the cost to a family, like, you know, the loss of their child or a loved one, and the rehabilitation and the industry reputation is important too. And then there seems to be a bit of a level of acceptance that we are going to get injured or hurt with a horse, and just due to this nature. So I think that times come where we need to start to look through a different lens and how we can improve what we do now. There is minimal research on prevention strategies. Like I said, we've predominantly focused on injury and illness, but there is some studies coming out now on helmets, air vests, horses' responses and human behaviours. We're starting to look at that more closely. And that to me is where we need to be focused on. Research basically is that we need to think about this research is investigating prevention and being more proactive around safety. We know that equestrian work or sport is high risk. And when I look at it from both sides of the fence, as an equestrian or as a horse person, whether it's work or non-work environment, and I look at that in context with other high-risk industries such as construction, mining, road transport, aviation, we've got a long way to go with the equestrian industry of how we can improve our safety and the welfare of our horses. And in these other industries, we have had significant good results, and they can boast risk management and a reduction in injuries and illness and mitigating fatalities. So why can't we look at that from an equestrian perspective? That to me is just logical. And also in a number of those high-risk areas, they have additional legislative requirements, and they have a strong focus on safety for their workers and operational compliance. So that's why I think this research is pretty important. And what needs to change? We need to know what people think right now and what they know, in including these horse-related human biases that people have, and why we do what we do around horses now, what influences what we do. So I'm going to kick over to the survey. That's my background as to why we've done this survey. And the 2 people that have been on this journey with me is Dr. Kiralee Thompson and also my supervisor, Matthew Thompson, Professor Matthew Thompson, which have been very helpful in developing, designing and reviewing the survey results. So what we did, there was 48 questions in total, and the survey was online. It took about 12 to 15 minutes, and the first part of the survey, I used a general risk behaviour survey, which is called the SOEP, which is a German socio-economic panel. And it was a number of questions, just generally asking people about their willingness to take risk. And this survey originated in Germany. About 22,000 people did this survey. And it looked at people's general risk attitudes in driving, their finances, leisure, sport, occupation, health, and faith in others. And what I wanted to do was just get a general understanding of the respondents that completed my survey as to what they were thinking about general risk-taking in normal daily life. Then we looked at some specific questions about horses and humans, which I'm pointing to here now. You know, things like, you know, do people think a horse is a hazard? Is it harmful? Do people also look at rules, and what is their risk perception around horses when they're handling or riding them? Do they feel they can control the risks when they're interacting with a horse? And human safety. Do they value their safety more than the horse, or do they value the horse's safety more than themselves? Other questions we looked at, like helmet use, whether people thought, you know, drugs was an okay thing to use to make a horse safer, knowledge of safety principles, safety checks, all of those things. And then I asked people to rate safety controls. We looked at human injuries and illness, and this was asking some quantitative information about, and they were numerical questions, about people's incapacities if they'd had an injury. And how did things change in their life? Did their beliefs change if they'd already had an injury or an illness? And then just general demographics like someone's age, their gender, country, the equine discipline they were interested in, their income, whether they worked and with horses and that was their main source of income, training, what training they'd had, their hours of exposure, how many falls had they had in their lifetime, and what did they self-rate their level of experience. So that was the 48 questions there. So the method, the survey was online, and it was online for about 5 months, and it was distributed via social media. We used SurveyMonkey. And the email targeted, like we targeted, breed societies, clubs and all organisations, as well as social media. And it was also distributed overseas in journal articles. We had some media coverage there as well. We looked at qualitative questions about people's beliefs and values and attitudes about safety around horses. There were some open-ended questions, and that included their training methods, some of their demographics and general comments. There was sequencing about how someone would handle, approach or ride a horse. And then we looked at quantitative questions, and I used a Likert scale, and I chose 6 choices so that no one sat on the fence, and it kind of went from strongly agreed, disagreed to strongly agreed. There was also yes and no questions. There was numerical questions, and there was a hierarchy that I used to look at how people would respond, and as far as risk mitigation, and a hierarchy of control, which we use a lot in workplace health and safety. There was also a rating scale that we use for people to rate their level of experience. It was a beginner, novice, intermediate, advanced or proficient, and I gave people a bit of an understanding of what I was looking for, a description of what each of those levels were. And we used this statistical software package to do some analysis of the findings that we got, and that was the analysis of the quantitative results. So I was pretty impressed. We reached 1,718 people around the world in 25 different countries. The age groups were from 15 to 18 years, and majority of the respondents that we had were females, but we did have some males, which was good to have. And there were about 85 different horse disciplines that people were engaged in. So from dressage to pleasure to equine assisted learning, breeding, hacking, polo cross, reining, harness, all sorts, racing, rehabilitation, rodeo, mounted police. So there was a whole 85 different disciplines that people engaged in. So when I looked at the quantitative findings, so this is, remember, people's opinions and their thoughts, I asked them to tell me what they did when they approached a horse on the ground. What were their key, most important factors to consider from a safety perspective? And as you can see, there's some interesting ones here. These are just some random ones I've put up here. People have said it's just gut instinct, it's common sense, approach it and see what happens. There's lots of comments here that people made about, when I'm going to approach a horse, what do I look out for to keep myself safe? These here are the key points that the majority of the participants came up with. They felt that the body language was important of the horse and observing its behaviour, looking at its attitude and demeanour, safely positioning themselves as they approach the horse, sniffing letting the horse sniff their hand and making sure that the horse faces up so that the horse is facing you, not having their hind end to you when you approach the horse. Communication, knowing a little bit about that horse before you go into a yard or wherever the horse may be to approach it, having a bit of an understanding of its history. Move slowly and stay calm, and always have a look around your environment and an escape route where you can get out and be safe. So that's what people felt, and that's what they thought about when we're going to routinely go and approach a horse on the ground. That was their safety check. So then I asked about, what do we do when we mount a horse? These are some of the findings or the answers that people also put up. Make sure I've got my phone. Am I fit to ride? Make sure it turns its head to me. Do a pre-flight check. Then there's some other specific horsemanship skills that people have had. Play yo-yo games. This is what people felt when they were going to ride a horse was important to them from a safety perspective. Majority of the people, when they were looking at mounting the horse, wanted to check the horse's health. So, you know, was it okay? Its welfare. Was its feet okay? Was it healthy to ride? Do a pre-start check, whatever that might be for that particular person. Again, look at its body language and observe its behaviour. Check the tack and fit. Make sure I've got my PP on, my helmet, my vest, my boots, etc. Do a bit of groundwork and lunging. Observe the horse's reactions and its mood. Make sure I've got a mounting block. Check the environment and the surroundings once again, and put a little bit of a weight in the stirrup before I actually get on the horse. So these were the quantitative findings. The next section that I want to talk about is still about the qualitative findings, but what the survey identified was that 76.1% of people that participated in the survey had done some form of groundwork training before they actually got on the horse to ride it. And this was predominantly informal. So it might have been a bit of pony club, it might have been self-taught or their family or someone, other significant other that was important to their life, their great uncle or whomever. It could have been on the job, bit of trial and error, life's lessons, natural horsemanship, you know, doing some mentoring with somebody, but 76.1% of people had done some groundwork training. These were a couple of comments that people made in regards to training on the ground. So then we looked at riding, and 85.2% of the participants participated in some form of training with their horse and themselves to be able to ride more safely. This was predominantly more formal, and it was regular, and it was with a more qualified person. So that could have been someone like a certified coach or at clinics, or someone that's recognised with an association like, you know, British Horse Society or EA, riding schools, etc. But most riders participating in the training had also participated in the groundwork. So there seemed to be a trend that, you know, if people had done some horsemanship on the ground, it rolled over into them continuing on with this learning and education about how to handle horses and work with horses more safely. It was quite positive. A couple of other comments that people made. I grew up on horses, just part of simple riding. And some people learnt their riding from online training and videos. So the qualitative findings also identified a few very strong points about what people say, believe and think. Some of these people commented about the human-animal bond. They just love their horse. And within the survey, there was a number, about a quarter of the participants that said that they would put the horse's safety before their own human safety and welfare. So they really loved their horse. They were prepared to put it in front of their safety. A few of the qualitative comments that people made: the English and European style of riding really talked up safety. They were very focused on that. Whereas some of the Western and Australian comments that were expressed, some were quite abrasive. And from this, they spoke about their tradition and their training methods and their culture and preserving that, and weren't interested in looking at any other research or safety changes. There was also a number of people that requested a horse safety legislation and a register. People talked about complacency causing accidents. Also, they talked about the potential of having a database for sales and vendor disclosure about a horse's level of safety and its history, and procurement, so the purchase of a horse or the lease of a horse, having some set procedure there that people can follow. People liked the sound of helmets, and they wanted them, particularly there was one comment about they should be compulsory in camp drafting. And other people said, if you're going to ride, you're going to fall anyway. There was a level of expectation that this was going to happen and an acceptance of risk. Anyone that gets on a horse, they're going to fall off. The likelihood is very high. Others commented about needing more safety training with horses. Some were resistant to change. They were embedded, you know, their culture and their tradition and their association, the way we do things was very embedded. Some people felt it was just common sense isn't common anymore. And then other people talked about their learned skills, that they would sacrifice what they know is safe to win a competition or an event. So that's some of the comments that people made throughout the survey. So moving on now to some of the quantitative findings, And what I did here to start with, I looked at a ranking where I wanted people to describe to me their safety actions and what they would do with it if they had a horse that displayed unsafe behaviours. And this particular ranking is used strongly in workplace health and safety. It's called a hierarchy of control. And what I did was wrote some comments about horses, for example, you know, wearing a helmet or another form of protective equipment, providing a better horse and rider match for a selected activity. And people were to choose what they felt would be the most likely or the less likely response that they would choose to make the unsafe behaviour of the horse more safe. So having a look at some of these results, the helmet has still been rated as #1 for safety. So if you put your lid on, your helmet on, you're going to be safe. Another interesting factor was, and people, there was a stronger awareness to wear your helmet more so at work or if you were out at an event than at home. So whether that was because you had to ride with a helmet in events or whatever, people would put their helmet on to go to work, but automatically they wouldn't, less likely to use that at home. To me, there should be no difference. When we look at the cohort that was involved in this research, what we found was the majority of people were from a sporting and a leisure environment. There was more respondents, actually about 70%, and the people that earned an income with horses was about 29.3%. So the majority were people that would ride a horse for leisure or sport or a social outing. The interesting factor here that we found with the survey results was that the majority of people self-rated their level of experience as intermediate to advanced. And the others, there was only about 12% that said they were proficient, beginners was about 2%, and novice was about 15.9%. So of the 1,718 participants, I asked them about safety controls and how they felt that they could mitigate risk, reduce the risk of harm when you're associated with a horse. Some of the findings that came out was people don't report at the moment. 89.2% of people don't report to anybody if they have an illness or an injury associated with a horse. So if they have a fall or they have a bite, they don't report it to anybody. But then I asked, well, if there was a reporting mechanism in Australia, a requirement to do that, would you report it? And there was about 46.8% of those people who don't report now that said they would report. I found that an interesting finding. There was about 81% of people that said they had a medical treated injury associated with a horse. Also, people would still, there was only about 3.6% of the respondents that said if the horse wasn't safe, they would still use it. And that was particularly around an inexperienced rider. So that question asked if a horse was unsafe, would you still allow someone that was inexperienced to ride it? And there was about 3.6% of the respondents that said yes, they would. As far as safety behaviour and believing that they influence other people, so what they do other people watch what they do, and do they influence them from a safety perspective? 91% of the respondents said that they do influence other people. 10% said they had no risk control over the horse. They didn't feel that they could mitigate risk. About 96% of people felt they could follow rules, and there was about 12.5% of people that said that they felt it was safe to drug a horse. That they would felt it was okay to drug a horse to make it safer. And then the last comment I want to make there is that when we look at our hierarchy of control, there was about 27% of people who rated training and supervision as an effective control measure in managing safety around horses. And that was the lowest and the least effective control that people felt worked. So what lessons can we learn from some of these findings? Well, the quantitative findings highlighted that the more experienced people from the advanced to proficient level had an increase in unsafe behaviours around horses. So there was an increase in negative safety behaviours. And when you add an income component to it or a sporting event, they displayed more unsafe behaviours when interacting with horses. And they were prepared to take more risk. So this could be shortcuts in getting the job done, or financial pressures to turn a horse over to make an income. And, you know, the belief that it's important to win, so at all cost. So the increased risk behaviours. So the quantitative findings also showed that training, be it formal training or informal training, it didn't matter. It increased people's beliefs and attitudes towards more positive safety behaviours. And which is great to think that the training that people are having is being embedded in their choices around horses and their idea of how can I be safer. So stop and think before they do an activity, whether it's approaching the horse or mounting the horse to ride, or even the environment that they're riding in. So the training has had an impact. Remember I said that the male respondents, the number was quite small. We still found that males exhibited a higher risk propensity. So even though it was a very small sample compared to the females, they were prepared to take more risks. And what we found that this was in the older males. So the average the older males were around that 60 to 65 that completed the survey. And finally, there was a trend showing there that if there was an increase in injury, there was also an increase in the acceptance of risk. And again, this was particularly in older males. So we found that there was the people that had had an injury more than 20 in their lifetime, that was about 3.7% of the respondents. There was majority of the respondents had about 10 or less injuries in their lifetime, that was about 96%. And people that had no injury so far was just on the 20%. So in a nutshell with that, people who had had injuries were going to expect that it was going to happen, and therefore they had a more general acceptance of the level of risk when associated with horses, that they were going to get hurt. So in kind of summing up what I'm talking about here, I talked about the hierarchy of control. And we've already talked about, we know horses can be dangerous. We know that they can cause significant harm, and it's normally serious, and they can be unpredictable. We also know that they have their own mind, they're a sentient being. And we believe that the helmet from the respondents from the survey is the #1 safety control. Well, that one really concerns me, because when you have a look here, if we have a look at the hierarchy of control, and from a workplace health and safety or an industry perspective, elimination is at the top of the chart. We need to try and remove the cause of danger as best we can. If we can't remove it, we need to substitute it, change something or use something different or isolate it. If we can separate people from the problem, that's what we need to aim for. And that could be like keeping a horse in a contained enclosure or away from others. That's a form of isolation. Engineering is very much about physically changing or redesigning or having a safeguard. And that could be changing in your TAC or change of your training program or how you're going to do that differently. Administration is changing or using signage or job rotation in normal workplace health and safety and other high-risk industries. But with horses, that could be some more training or supervision or limit the activities that you're doing. And PPE, putting your helmet on or other equipment. So in other industries, we start here and we work down. Oh my goodness. Hello? I'm sorry, I lost the screen. Good. So in other industries, we start at the top here, and that's a legislated expectation. In aviation, for example, they have their own prescribed regulatory legislative framework and guidelines on how they need to operate. That is called CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. They do audits, they mandate compliance, they have to have strict licensing for a pilot to operate a plane, they have medical health checks, psychological assessments, etc. In the construction industry, again, they work from the top and work down. This hierarchy, they have to be certified, and you have to have refreshers every 1 to 3 years to be able to even go on a construction site. They have to demonstrate higher-end controls and justify why they've taken a particular a course of action once they've done a risk assessment or approach a hazard and work out how they're going to manage it. They have to follow a prescribed process. They do audits, they have safety standards, and if they're not met, the job just doesn't start. Mining is another high-risk area that starts from the top and works down. So whether it's above ground or underground, it doesn't matter. They have to have pre-works, they have to prepare the site, they have to have safety systems in place and approved before the work starts. They have to have trained operators, fit for purpose equipment and machinery, and they also have to have mandatory reporting checks. So that could be pre-starts, audits, health surveillance, etc., etc. So all of our high-risk industries Start with elimination and work down this hierarchy. Whereas in equestrian, we seem to think that put the helmet on and work up the other way is going to suffice. Well, my thoughts are, I think we can do better. And if we classify and we think about horses as equestrian is the industry and horses being dangerous, we need to start to think about mirroring what other high-risk workplaces do. And I believe that we can, and I believe that we are certainly shifting our focus. So what needs to change? To me, our perception of risk during horse interactions, our awareness, more training or stringent safety processes, and reinforce rules. Whether this is at home, whether this is at a sporting event, at an industry level, I believe we need to mirror what other high-risk workplaces do now, because they have had a reduction in injuries and illnesses. We need to also identify and implement more effective risk controls, not just settle for the helmet, look for higher end controls. I believe we need to be a generative equine safety culture, not be stuck in tradition and influenced by culture or our society or our associations. Be an individual and say no if you think it's unsafe. Don't stick with the group. Think, what if I had only made that decision or changed something to be safer, not if only after an event, an injury had happened. And be open to new ideas and what research findings and equitation science is identifying. I believe we can work towards best practice in safety, having some standards and guidelines, like I said, based on what other high-risk industries do. And maybe in the future, with all of this research that's happening now, is consider looking at a regulatory framework or ongoing industry conformance. So that's a bit of an overview of what my research is about, and I think there was some significant points there that we've highlighted. And yeah, I'll be continuing on this journey with the paper being released hopefully at the end of this year, and some further study in this space.